Massimo Bottura is an Italian chef running a 3-star Michelin restaurant.
He's actually been called the Jimi Hendrix of Italian chefs.
There was one iconic dish, oops, I dropped the lemon tart, and this became his signature dish.
Is it the best lemon tart in the world, or is it the one that has the best brand in the world?
Let's sketch the scenario. 3-Michelin-star kitchen. Everyone is super serious. You cannot make mistakes. He actually dropped the dessert, and it fell on the kitchen floor. You can just hear the dead silence, the panic in their eyes. I think as marketers, you always plan, but you cannot always control the outcomes. It is good to plan because it's a forcing function to think, but then you need to plan to deal with uncontrollable variables. You're always constrained. You don't have all the resources. In a way, your constraints are your advantage. By being very intentional and aware of what your constraints and disadvantages are, you can be really focused on how to use these to actually be more successful. And that is something I take from Massimo Bottura.
This is the best thing I've ever seen.
That. Let's talk about that.
Listen to this.
Listen to this.
Memorable?
Well, then be less boring.
Boring?
Remarkable.
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 I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. You're listening to Remarkable. This week, we're talking marketing lessons from Italian chef Massimo Bottura.
Hi, I am Massimo Bottura, and I'm the chef at the Osteria Francescana.
With the help of your special guest, VP of Marketing at Riverside, Abel. How are you?
I'm very good and excited to talk a bit more about marketing in general and Massimo Bottura in specific.
Wow, you pronounce it a lot better than I do.
Beautifully.
He's bringing a pro. Yeah, great topic, super fun, and of course we'll touch on Riverside, where we're recording this here podcast today. So why the heck did you pick Massimo Bottura to talk about today?
So I've never been schooled or trained as a marketeer. I'm coming from an economics background. At the same time, I've been cooking for many years, even in restaurant kitchens. And so I like to take inspiration from other fields than marketing. And Massimo Bottura is an Italian chef running a 3-star Michelin restaurant. You need to understand extremely high pressure environment where if you make one mistake, your reputation is gone and probably your business is out in 3 years, if not sooner. And so there's something there of where in kitchens, in cuisines, it's a high pressure environment and people need to keep on innovating and tell stories through their food, through their concepts. And so I think there are a lot of similarities to marketeers that need to tell stories, understand their audience, understand when to innovate, when to go back to the basics. And so that is why I take a lot of inspiration from him. And so that's why I thought it would be fun to speak about it.
Amazing. I'm excited to dig in. But first, tell us about your role as VP of Marketing at Riverside.
Sure. So VP Marketing at Riverside, when you zoom out, the role of marketing within Riverside is that we have a self-serve motion and a sales-led motion. That means that there is a very diversified marketing organization. And so my responsibility is, on one hand, how do we bring in more users? How do we grow revenue? On the other hand, how do we build a brand? How do we create a community around our product? How do we create advocacy? How do we make sure that our user base understands how, when, and why to use Riverside? And as a product that keeps on evolving, it means that there's a lot of education and a lot of content that's being created to help our user base being successful, both with Riverside as well as with video creation in general.
Amazing. And we'll dig more into that here in a little bit. Meredith, who the heck is Massimo Bottura?
So I thought I'd start with a quote from him, which is, "I grew up under the kitchen table. As my grandmother Ancella rolled out the pasta dough, I hid under from my older brothers with flour falling on my feet. At Osteria Francescana, we look at the world with the eyes of a child, from under the table and upside down." And I just thought that was a perfect picture of how he approaches cuisine and food. So he is, as Abel mentioned, a world-renowned Italian chef. He's owner of the restaurant Osteria Francescana, which is in Modena in Italy. He's actually been called the Jimi Hendrix of Italian chefs, which I thought was funny. And that was by Chef Mario Batali, who said he takes traditional Italian dishes and turns them on their heads.
I want to teach you the way to evolve classic recipes from traditional Italian cuisine and bring them into the future. This is like the pasta is talking to you and is saying, eat me, please, eat me, I'm here for you.
His restaurant has 3 Michelin stars, as we mentioned, which is actually the maximum a restaurant can have or be awarded. And it denotes exceptional cuisine worth a special trip. It's also been ranked as the world's best restaurant twice in 2016 and 2018. And when he talks about his restaurant, he considers it a laboratory of ideas. He says it is also an observatory where we look at the past in a critical way, not a nostalgic one, which I thought was really interesting. He says tradition and evolution means looking at our culinary traditions from 10 kilometers away to bring the best of the past into the future. One thing I wanted to mention was his path to cooking wasn't a straight line. His dad wanted him to study law, which he did for only 2 semesters, and then decided it wasn't for him. He ended up dropping out, and then he worked in his family's petroleum business before quitting. And then in 1986, he took over this restaurant, Trattoria del Campazzo. And so I think all along he sort of had this notion of this is my actual path, and he'd sort of been trying what everyone else said he should be doing, and then decided that he just had to kind of go for it.
In my mind, what I'm shaping is creating this idea of feeding people with emotion and make them feel kids again. I'm cooking like a kid every day.
And he did have the most excellent mentors along the way, namely Alain Ducasse and Ferran Adria. Ducasse is actually a legendary chef from Monaco. He's earned more Michelin stars than any other living chef. And the other Adria is a famous Spanish chef, and he's considered one of the best chefs in the world. So if you had to have any mentors, he had the best of the best. And he's actually sort of turned that around for himself now, and has become a mentor to many other chefs as well, which I think is amazing. And I wanted to share also a couple good examples of Bottura's signature dishes really exemplify his take on cuisine. One is called 5 Ages of Parmigiano Reggiano, and there's 5 different Parmesans. They're all aged to 24, 30, 36, 40, and 50 years. I've never had a 50-year Parmesan. It sounds wild. And they're all prepared differently. One is a cream sauce, one's a foam, one's a crispy wafer, etc. And another signature dish is called the crunchy part of the lasagna, which I thought was funny and cute. And he describes this as the emotional part of the lasagna. And he has his memory of his grandmother bringing lasagna to the table. And he and his older brother are fighting over the crunchy parts. And so he was like, what if I just made a dish that had just the best parts? And so that's sort of where that came from.
It's the crunchy part of the lasagna is pure emotion. That's the best part of the lasagna. I want to share the best part with every single guest who comes all over the world.
So I would say his emotional or his approach to cuisine is heavily influenced by his childhood. Yeah, he takes this sort of analytical approach where he's taking the best parts to the table, and it's heavily driven by emotion, which I feel are all things that we could potentially apply to marketing. But Abel, I'm wondering what your exposure to his food has been like. Have you tried it before? Have you seen his Chef's Table episode? And that was my first sort of introduction to him.
Yeah, so I'm a fan of Italy as a vacation country, and so I've been following his food and his take on food for many years prior to seeing Chef's Table. But what the Chef's Table episode helped me do is contextualize and understand the thinking behind it, and sort of hearing his way of thinking and also his way of dealing with unexpected situations and how to turn them around into something that becomes like an advantage.
I serve tortellini only with 6 tortellini in one line. They were walking into the broth. Can you imagine what the locals, they were thinking about us? They want me dead.
And I think that is something that I took a lot of inspiration from. And so that's why I've kept following him. And still to the day of today, I look at what he's doing, what his storytelling is, what his concepts, and how he's innovating Italian cuisine, which traditionally is a very, um, let's say, strict and sort of classical way of cooking.
Yeah, that's super fascinating to me, that to take something that everyone has always seen as done one way and then think of new ways to do it. Stuff like that I always like. But specifically with Italian cooking, where there's so much history and so much, like, of the way it has always been done is the right way. I think Italian people pretty firmly believe that their food is the best in the world. So, anytime that you're riffing on that or changing it in any way, you're changing the best food in the world. So why would you be doing that? You're going to get some level of pushback. There's probably a world in which people just, thought his ideas were crazy.
Exactly, exactly. It has taken many years for his local community in Modena, which is actually an epicenter of food culture, but the traditional food culture where the Parmesan cheese is coming from, as well as the balsamico vinegar. And so it took a lot of time for him to be respected within his inner community. And I think that often happens, that people from the outside start to see and value the innovation and the new thinking, but it takes much longer to convince this core audience, this local community that he had. But actually, the reason why I suggested to discuss Massimo Bottura is because I think there was one iconic dish, maybe his most well-known dish, which is called along the lines of "Oops, I dropped a lemon tart." And this became his signature dish. But when you hear the story of how it was born, how it was created, I think that is really, really fascinating and worth zooming in on. So I'd be happy to share more if you're interested.
Yeah, I want to hear more.
So I think, again, let's sketch the scenario. Three-Michelin-star kitchen. Everyone is super, super serious. You cannot make mistakes. Why? Because it only takes one important guest in the restaurant that writes a bad review for you to ruin your restaurant, lose your credibility, and basically you're out of business in, again, 1, 2, 3 years. And so during one evening shift, there was a chef in the kitchen, not the head chef, who made the dessert. And the moment he finished and brought it to the front of the kitchen from where it's being served, he actually dropped the dessert. And it fell on the kitchen floor. You can imagine it's hectic. You have 30 people. Everything is like an oiled machine. Someone throws something on the ground. You hear it. The plate scatters in many pieces. You can just hear the dead silence, the panic in their eyes. And so Bottura himself was in the kitchen.
I said, Taka, no, Taka is so beautiful. Don't you see? With the zabaglione just made, was splash proper. And so I said, look, Taka, look at this. This is just perfect.
And that is how this dessert was actually created, where they made the perfect lemon tart as a dessert. And then now they actually intentionally serve it cracked. So they take the back of a spoon, they basically snap the perfect tart into something that looks like a broken tart, which almost looks artistic, almost like a Jackson Pollock kind of way of dripping the paint on the canvas. And from now on, this is, let's say, one of his most iconic, if not his most iconic dish that he keeps on serving in his restaurant. And so for me, it was very touching and very inspiring to take this high stress environment, something that goes completely wrong, and then still you figure out a way to stay sane, keep calm, and transform it into something that actually is unique, much more creative, much more powerful in terms of storytelling.
It is
That's amazing.
beautiful. I just looked up pictures of it. It's like beautiful in its messiness.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Exactly. It's like the perfection in the imperfection, which makes it more realistic and which makes it much more credible and touching.
I love that idea, though. I love that idea of like taking a huge mistake, what could be a huge mistake and super chaotic, and being like, wait, this could actually be, something that we make iconic.
Now, I think that's often where real creativity is, that very often it's a coincidence of different factors. And so there's an unintentionality behind creation, that when you plan everything out, you'll never come to that result. And when you allow space for exploration, for playfulness, for doing things that you never planned, sometimes you get to things that you would never get to, and sometimes they're better than what you actually can envision and visualize yourself. And so I think there's something very powerful in that lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think also too, just like from a marketing and memorable standpoint, like now all of a sudden it's has a story and a name and a brand and all this stuff, whereas like before you'd be like, do you really remember the best lemon tart you've ever had? It's like, probably not, but you would remember this now, right? I think that that's part of it. It's like, is it the best lemon tart in the world, or is it the one that has the best brand in the world? It's like, it might be both, but
Interesting.
it definitely is the most unique one.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Okay, let's get into our marketing takeaways here. What marketing takeaways do you take away from Chef Massimo Bottura?
Sure. So I think as marketers, you always plan, but you cannot always control the outcomes. And so let's say the more dynamic the market or the environment is where you operate, the more uncontrollable variables you'll face. And so it is good to plan because it's a forcing function to think, but then you need to plan to be surprised, to deal with uncontrollable variables, and to just be able to pause, to think, and to figure out how you make the most out of any situation. Because there are things internally you can control for. There are many market variables you cannot control for. Plus, there's a lot of humans in the loop, so things go wrong. And I think you need to embrace that. You need to enjoy that. And you need to be able to always think and be a leader in that sense of figuring out how, with constraints and with chaos, you get something to the best possible outcome. So I think that is one very, very clear lesson. Something else I like, which is, I guess you can apply it to marketing, you can apply it to strategy in general, especially for startups. You're always constrained. You don't have all the resources. You always have disadvantages compared to others. And I think, in a way, your constraints are your advantage. Because if you don't have constraints, you think it's better, but in practice, often you lose creativity because everything is possible and therefore nothing is good enough. And by being very, very intentional and aware of what your constraints and disadvantages are, you can be really focused on how to use these to actually create some sort of playing field where you can be more successful. And so turning, let's say, your disadvantage or your lack of into your advantage. And that is something I take from Massimo Bottura and how he dealt with this situation. And something else I like, and I think that is true in marketing, it's true whatever you do, is that you will find so many problems everywhere. Things never exactly go as planned. But I think the biggest difference between a leader or someone that creates progress and not is that you trust yourself to solve problems. And you do that by understanding the environment you're at, understanding the situation, what are your options, break something down, and then just think, okay, given the new reality, how do I move forward? How do I do this? And so that is something very strong that has always resonated with me. And so these are some of the lessons that I think are transferable to marketing, to business, to life, if you will.
I love it. Yeah, for me, a couple things. Number one, I think his whole, sort of method is turning things on its head. And like that's how you become unique and how you become different and like not do what everyone else is doing. And I think that if you start with a mindset of that, of turning things on its head, then you can sort of like uncover little things. Like if you accidentally drop the tart, right? And then you can make an accident turn into something that's great. I feel like if you don't start with that sort of mindset, then you're just not ever going to be able to appreciate, that. If everything has to always be perfect, then as soon as something is different, then it's not good. Like, different stuff is not going to be perfect, seen as perfect at the time. So it's like if you build a culture of making things that are different and unique and not like everyone else is doing, and not measuring yourself up to the same things that everyone else is doing, then you inherently, you're going to be able to create things that are unique, and things that are unique are the things that stand out. Um, as evidenced by, by his food and his restaurant and his legacy of being unique and different. And then the other thing that I think is interesting that he has a bunch of other restaurants, right? So like he has the primary restaurant, and then he's, gone and made a bunch of different ones. And I always just find that so fascinating because um he's only in one, right? And a lot every chef does this, right? Every big time chef, that they have, restaurants that it's their recipes, their unique creations, and then they go and make that. So he has the Gucci Osteria in Florence and Beverly Hills and Tokyo, Seoul, Singapore, and Miami. Oh, sorry, no, the Singapore and Miami are two different types of restaurants. But so my point being, like, so he has all these other different restaurants which have also won all sorts of other rewards, and I think that like um figuring out how to create and replicate something that is like unique and different and and culturally successful. Food is different because like food is food. So if you have a wonderful experience at the restaurant, the food is great, like you're probably pretty excited. um but there's just a great lesson there, is like he can't be there every night, right? So like what is the DNA of what he's building and making that's gonna be able to be repetitive in those other places? um and I think that that's something to think about and consider. Is like how would you create similar amazing things on your marketing team if you're just to let other people run with certain projects? And like what would be the recipe that you would give them, or the recipes that you would give them, and then let them take and be able to make it, but also make it their own.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's about setting or creating the right culture and principles, both in terms of your methodology as well as in terms of being very clear what you stand for. And so, what is your high level North Star, or what are you moving towards to, without like exactly, again, paving the road to how you want to get there, but just be very clear to your team in the sense of this is where we need to go. And then you work with the team and empower them to figure it out, as long as there's the clarity of where you want to get to and what are the sort of methodologies you apply, what are the principles, what is the culture you create to get there.
It's just funny how big, his brand name gets, or his name gets, that, he puts his name on a restaurant, right? Um, that, but the head chef is not going to be him in those cases, right? So it's like, what is the Gucci Osteria in Beverly Hills? Like he's not the head chef. So it's like, I just, stuff like that is fascinating, right? And it's like a restaurant that's won a ton of awards. And I like, that's just it's a different thing in food, but and in restaurants. But I wonder how you could make that analogous to marketing, where his name is literally on the building. It's on the it's on the Gucci Osteria de Massimo Bottura, but the head chef isn't him, right? So I don't know, just stuff like that I think is fascinating. So it's like, how can you make something that's so consistent, but also sort of, surprises people? And also, fun fact, the one in Florence that the guy, Taka Kondo, who dropped the tart is uh, um, one of the chefs. Pretty great.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you think about marketing, when you think about expansion into new countries, new geos, and especially localizing your efforts, there might be a resemblance there because the product you sell is by and large, if not identical. The high level brand that you want to build is identical, yet there are a lot of cultural nuances and changes and other people running local teams and efforts. And so, how do you make sure that you indeed maintain the soul, the identity, the overall feeling across the board while giving people enough space to localize and do what they think is best within the local branches and maintain quality and reputation across the board, which isn't easy, right? We all know that.
Yeah. I think I also have to say, number one, I don't think I knew exactly what a Michelin star looked like until before this. I don't think I actually knew what it looked like. It's not really a star per se, but it's also just crazy to me that it's like this is the tire company that made this up like 100 some years ago, and it gets me every time. It tickles me to no end. Truly one of the greatest pieces of content marketing in marketing history is the Michelin star.
Agree. I would even say that more people know them for the restaurant related reputation than their core business.
Switching gears to marketing. So obviously, like we're on Riverside right now. We produce 100 plus podcasts and video series. As we've done a lot of episodes on Riverside. We know the platform very well. Exciting to have you on the show. In general, but also because of that. And I'm curious, like, where are we at with video right now with companies? Like, where are our B2B companies specifically at with video? Because to me, it still seems like it's early days.
It is. It is. Like, I couldn't agree more. I think when you're in the trenches, you might think that everyone's thinking about video. But when you zoom out, you realize that you're part of this early adopter group. And so I would even say that like we see a few macro changes that exemplify where we are. And it is an important crossroad because I speak with marketing leaders across B2B, B2C, mid-market, enterprise. And I always like to ask them the same questions. And so I ask, do you want to do more with video in the coming year? And I need to travel around the world to find one person, one marketing leader saying no. And then I
it's
say,
crazy, right? I say the same thing.
Exactly. And so I say, okay, great. You want to do more with video. And then I ask, are you actually doing more with video? And then before they can answer, I see their body language is changing. But, and you feel it. And then you ask, okay, so are you doing more with video? And that is like where the hesitation kicks in. That is where the challenges come up. And that's where most people are saying, I want to do more. I'm trying some, but not really. And so I think that is sort of the point where we are, what we see. And when you zoom out and think more about why would you want to use video, I think it's very clear that video as a medium is very powerful. But also, if you look at the US consumers, when you look at streaming television, YouTube became quite recently the main streaming destination on TV.
Yep.
And they're growing. They almost tripled since January 2022. And so what it means is that we see across the board that viewership of video is rising explosively. When we look at whether video actually performs in terms of engagement, in terms of conversion, we see the same. And when you do research of whether consumers want more video, they all say yes. And so all these marketing leaders and business leaders that say they want to do more with video, they're right. Their intuition is right. The data is there to back it up. Yet there is this real challenge of how do I make this transition? How do I actually go from what I want to actual execution in a way that people are proud, they convey their message effectively without burning out their teams. And so I think that is something that we see, and that's a real problem, but also an exciting opportunity where there are more and more tools and solutions to that. Are you seeing the same thing?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's crazy. Well, and the thing, as an industry, we've been so reluctant to create video because it's just been expensive. It's just, at the end of the day, like, it's just so much cheaper to churn out blog content than it has been to make video content. So I think that that's like the first thing. And then there's just like, it's way harder. Like, it's way, 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 way harder to make a good video than it is to make like good writing. So, like, even from making podcasts, which, we've made a million of, but it's just so much harder to make a video. Like, the competition of putting something out in podcast form versus the competition of putting something on YouTube. I mean, like, something that you could put out on a podcast, like, won't last 15 seconds on a YouTube video. You just won't. It's just too competitive because there's I don't know, 1,000x more factors. So I think all of those situations create something that there's a barrier there. And then the third thing is, you can create anything. So, like, if you're creating like a podcast series, like, generally speaking, you sort of know what you're going to do. I mean, I push back on that a little bit because I try to push people. I'm like, there's a million things you can do in podcast world that you are not doing. Like, it doesn't need to be a 55-minute two people talking sort of thing. But in video, like, it could be 15 seconds, it could be 50 minutes, it could be 5 hours, it could be a news show, it could be, whatever. Like, the form and format and function of video is like so different. It's everything from a Netflix, series to, someone recording something, at a conference, walking around. So the complexity is there. I think, so I think that makes it challenging. I also think, like, there's no centralized location in marketing, like, or sorry, in B2B, like, where video like truly lives. I think it's like, if you just look at who owns a YouTube channel, it's like most companies, you say, oh, it's probably this department. You go, okay, what about product? Can they post videos? Yeah, product can post videos. What about your customer success team? Is like, oh, yeah, well, they have to get approvals through this other thing. What about this? So it just ends up being like, their YouTube channel is like this repository for just like stuff. Like, their event is there, their product videos. They're not like actually using it in any like truly meaningful way for most companies. And then you compound that with the fact that, like, now short form video is like so much more powerful and so much more present. As you mentioned, sort of like, YouTube being the most popular platform on actual television. So, like, and connected TV being super important. So all of that to say, it's like, how many B2B companies are making like a show that could be watched on a TV? Like, so few. How many are making like really, really good short form? Like, not a ton. So, and then you start to like say, okay, well, what about like real storytelling? What about something that's more scripted? What about fiction? What about all these other media or like, types of content? And like, those aren't even being explored at all. What about building like a news show? What about building, any of those things? Like, there just hasn't been a lot of that. So I think that there's hesitance there, and you have to be really dialed in, I think, to make exceptional video. And you have to build systems in your company to make that stuff. And those just didn't exist. Like, blogs existed, the infrastructure for blogs, because we built it over a decade or 2 decades. we built all that stuff, right? And it was like clear, it was like SEO, like works. So you need to create blog content. And then there's other types of written content. And whereas video, like there's just no infrastructure there. And most companies are like, yeah, we have like a video person and that's it. Yeah, I mean, that's my magnum opus on why B2B video is a bit lagging.
Yeah. And it's also the feedback loop. Like it's at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's a vicious cycle. The more effort it takes, the bigger the investment, the more trust and buy-in you need to be able to put in the work, give it the time, improve it, to get it to a place where it actually drives business impact. And so traditionally, if there aren't as many proven use cases of using video to drive results, where measurement is hard, where the tooling didn't really help, let's be honest, it made it unnecessarily difficult. And so I think in the future, where it becomes easier, not easy, but easier to do it, I think that also helps you to iterate much faster, to reduce the time it takes from actually creating something to publishing something, starting to see whether it drives engagement. And so you're sort of minimizing the risk and resource it takes to get to that point where you build confidence and trust in the fact that you need to use video as part of your content marketing. And so I think it goes hand in hand, where the more people go in, the more actually good examples there are for B2B companies to really go big on video. And so I do expect that we'll see more and more people um, seeing good results and therefore more people wanting to do video. And I think that's also why when speaking with marketing and business leaders, they all say yes. It's just more that, okay, yes is not enough. It's yes and. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to operationalize it? How are you going to create, let's say, a minimum viable product to prove that you should do more video and start building that muscle within the company?
Yeah, there's a really negative feedback loop that happened with podcasts and with video series over the past like 10 years, where people would start a podcast or they'd start a video podcast or a video series, and then it would be bad. And then they would put it out there, and then it would get no listeners, and they wouldn't do enough distribution, and then they would just say the channel doesn't work. They're like, "Oh, this doesn't work for us. Oh, our audience doesn't like this." And you're like, and then like we'll go in and we'll like audit it, and we'll be like, "Hey, I don't know who's overseeing this, but like this is a terrible show. The host has no energy. The content is not good. It's not really providing value. It's very unclear who it's for. It's extremely like all over the place in the delivery of those insights. Like this just isn't good." And so to say like this doesn't work after one experiment is like so silly, right? Or like you compare that to like Hollywood, where Hollywood is going to run like 100 pilots a year to see what people like. And sometimes, Breaking Bad didn't take off till like season 3. You know what I mean? So there's so many examples of things like that. And I think that, in the like test and iterate culture that we have, which is not bad, but like content just doesn't always work like that. Especially if you're building a series. Like the number of times that you just like miraculously happened into like the first episode of a series is like so low. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of people got sort of caught in that trap with like, all right, well, we'll just keep doing what we're doing. And that negative feedback loop. And then the measurement tools, especially if you're looking at like the apps where they don't want to share information with you, right? It's like Apple, Spotify, YouTube, like they really don't want to share who's listening. And in like B2B, who's viewing it or listening is the most important thing that you need. And so that creates another sort of, lack of data there creates another pretty significant challenge. And so all of those things to say, like, it's harder, it's more expensive to make, it's more difficult. We don't know if we're doing it right. We don't know if it's working. And so that just led to this malaise. But what I say is just like your amount of video content should be 1-to-1 for how much video is being consumed. Like if your audience is consuming, like, I think it's 5 hours of video a day, like you should be making an equivalent amount percentage wise of content. So like if you 100% of your content, 40% of it should be written, and whatever 50% of it should be audio and video and 10% should be other crazy stuff, I don't know, comic books or whatever. But like, it's just silly to me that to have most, I mean, what do you think the percentage is for like most companies, how much video content they're making versus written?
Oh, it's probably less than 20, maybe 10% is even a positive estimation.
Yeah.
I think it's very low. I do think there are some signals that things are changing. That I think what's interesting is when you look at the last year and you look at podcasting, video conversations as a medium, I do think there have been like quite a few cultural moments that show people that, wait a moment, maybe I do need to think differently about video, or maybe I had this hunch but I haven't acted on it. I should act on it. Where I think it's very clear that when you think about media and sort of what is the future of media, it's all about going direct. The media landscape is being decentralized, where you follow individuals instead of publications. And so I think we've seen not only the role of podcasts, maybe with US elections a year ago, we've seen in pop culture Taylor Swift announcing her album on a YouTube show. We've seen leading B2B companies such as OpenAI and Stripe, both that started actually their podcast or their video show. At the end of the day, the definitions are getting very blurry. And so there's a reason, there's something all these people know about audience building and reaching their audience with the right message that many other people don't know or don't realize yet. And I think one misperception is also that if you're comparing long form video to actually, let's say, blog post or social media messages, and you just compare reach, where I once heard someone say, and this resonated, that the way you need to think about podcasts or video shows for B2B specific is that at the end of the day, if you invest 30, 45, maybe even 60 minutes of time to listen to something, it is as if you're speaking in front of them. And so if you get 1,000 listeners per episode, you're in a hall, in a local event hall with 1,000 people that are engaged. That is insane, right? If you do an
Yeah, that's
offline
crazy.
event, for most
Exactly.
B2B companies, you don't even think twice and you're asking, okay, how can we do more of this? But somehow we forget to differentiate between impressions, between all this data that is sort of quantitative, but it lacks sort of the tangibility for some people. But if you place it in that perspective, I think it changes a lot how people think about it.
Totally agree. Yeah. I know I spoke at an event recently and like 200 people there, and you're like, this is so many people, and you're like, our shows get like 10x
Like you get
more.
nervous when you have 200
Yeah.
people in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your content strategy for Riverside?
Yeah, so I think it all starts by trying to get clear on what we want to achieve. And so going back to, we're focused on, okay, how can we both be most helpful to our audience? What that means is, how can we make them successful with Riverside and then help them get the most value out of Riverside, improve the way they create content in terms of quality, in terms of workflow, so more the efficiency side of things. But then we were really focused on aligning ourselves with what they want to become. And so it's much more, how do we give them all the information, both inspiration as well as education, as well as entertainment, of how can they actually use podcasts and videos within their overall efforts, whether you're a B2B company and you want to create trust, you want to establish yourself as an expert, or when you're an individual creator and you want to build an audience, or you want to sell a service indirectly through your content. And so we do that across different channels, where YouTube is essential for us. And so we use a lot of video across the board, where we take like a platform first approach. So each platform has a different audience and we optimize for that. And I think when we evaluate various content ideas, we're always think about distribution, meaning, is distribution baked in because of the topic and people search for it? So more intent driven. Is distribution baked in because it's relevant? it touches upon the cultural zeitgeist and people share it? Or is the distribution baked into it because you create the content with people that help you share it with their network and you want to reach them? So it really starts by we have the high level goals of how we use content to drive business impact and help build the brand. Then we take a channel first approach, very clear on the audience, and we think about inherently about the format of how we can best use that format to reach our goals. Concretely, we split it between short form, long form, live, where we use short form for discovery. So it's much more in the awareness stage, much more on the entertaining side of things. We use long form to create trust, to educate, to really build that connection and to create that affinity with Riverside. And then we use live to create and engage our community and really build much more advocacy, if you will. And those three things we combine together. And then there's also the repurposing between different platforms of how you try to make sure that you don't invest everything in one piece of content, but that you give, let's say, that same piece of content more chances to reach the people you wanted to reach.
Fantastic. That's a great encapsulation. And very similar to what we do as well, which I love. And most of it here on Riverside. I mean, we talked about how hard it is sort of like making video, and historically, like it's just been so hard. And obviously that's getting way better with tools like Riverside, but like how broken is the creative workflow? Because it just managing large files in and of itself kills our team all day, every day. But I know it's just such a difficult process.
Exactly. So I think people that consume videos and have never created videos, they always they fall off their chair when you explain the video production process and what goes into it. And even for more talking head style conversational content where post production is minimal, even that is just too hard. And so what we see is when we map the creative workflow, when you look at, let's say, how people used to create 3-5 years ago, and yet today most people still create the traditional way, is you have all the pre-production that remains. You do the research, it's a strategy, it's a conceptualizing, how do you do it? But then if you go to the hands-on creation stage, people use one solution to record. Then you need to import those files into a program where you edit. Often you use a separate tool to transcribe and then to collaborate on a Google Doc on actually building the storyline and the script and leaving notes for an editor. Then when you're finally ready to use another tool to edit, you do almost everything manually, where a lot of the work is repetitive. Once you're done with editing, you use another tool to add captions. Once you're done, you use another tool to create sort of short form clips to promote your long form content, and you need to go through it manually. You use another tool to host or publish and schedule your content. And so when you zoom out and think about it, often we see B2B companies use 5, if not 10, if sometimes not 15 different tools to get one video from production to publishing. And I think that's crazy. And that is something that we've seen a lot of companies use Riverside for, where we believe that video creation should be consolidated. It is all about focusing on and putting more effort into the storyline. How do you create the best stories? How do you create the best conversations while making sure that the production workflow itself is very much simplified so that everyone involved can really focus on how do we bring the best conversations to the world instead of how do we transfer files from A to B? How do we wait 5 hours until that is done? How do we not only, let's say, focus on the creative side of production instead of really focusing on all the tooling? And so that means that the moment we simplify it and we see it across our customer base, more people can actually go from idea to expression. And so that is the change we see. And that also connects to these marketing leaders in B2B that want to do more with video, but they simply don't know how. And we see that by offering one platform to actually go from production to publishing. We see more and more non-technical people that can actually start to create content. So when you think about a company like Canva and what they've done for visual design, we are working and we see something similar in the sense of adoption of Riverside when it comes down to podcast and video creation, where suddenly a lot of people can share incredible ideas, incredible stories, because the traditional barriers are taken away. And so we believe this is part of the solution to help companies in B2B make this transition towards a video first content strategy.
Amazing. We're right there with you, following along every day in recording in Riverside. Abel, fantastic having you on the show. Thanks so much. For listeners. Go check out Riverside. Any final thoughts? Anything to plug?
No, I think if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Cool.
But go check out Riverside, riverside.com. Very easy. You can even start for free, and happy to help.
Amazing. And we'll be in touch soon. Thanks so much, Abel.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to get more, or you can go to caspianstudios.com. Thanks so much for hanging.